The lawyer's office smelled like paper and cold coffee, and my son was sitting 3 feet away from me, explaining to a stranger that my mind was going. He didn't say it cruelly. That's the part people never understand. He said it the way you'd mention a leaking roof. A practical problem, unfortunate but manageable, if handled early. He forgets appointments, Daniel said. He repeats himself. Last month he called me twice in one afternoon about the same insurance form. He glanced at me with something that looked like affection, and I suppose part of it was. Dad's proud. He won't tell you any of this himself. The attorney, a careful man in his 40s named Reese, looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Not unkindly. Just measuring. Mr. Whitaker, he said. Do you understand what a durable power of attorney does? I said yes. And you'd be comfortable with your son holding that authority? There was a moment there, a long one. I could feel my own pulse in my thumb where it rested against the arm of the chair. 74 years old, and I was being asked politely, in a room with good lighting and expensive chairs, whether I still belonged to myself. Daniel had already slid the folder across the desk. He'd had it prepared. Tabs on the pages. Little yellow arrows where I was supposed to sign. I looked at the arrows for a while. Then I said, before I sign anything, I'd like a second opinion. Daniel's head turned. Dad, not about the paperwork, I said. About my mind. The room got quiet in a way rooms rarely do. Reese set down his pen. He didn't look at Daniel. He looked at me and something in his posture changed. The way a man sits up when the conversation he expected turns into a different one entirely. That's your right, he said slowly. Absolutely you're right. Daniel laughed, short, a little too loud for the size of the room. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said. This paranoia. This is new, I didn't answer him. I've learned that you don't have to answer everything, but I want to be honest with you before I go any further. That morning, sitting in that chair, I wasn't calm because I was brave. I was calm because I already knew something my son didn't, and I'd known it for 11 days. Before anyone began questioning my mind, my life was very small, not lonely, not empty, just precise. I wake at 5:30 most mornings without an alarm. I grind my coffee by hand, a habit I kept from my working years, and sit at the kitchen table facing the backyard. There's a sugar maple back there older than the house. My wife planted it when Daniel was 10. She said she wanted something that would outlive us both. She's been gone 8 years now. Ovarian cancer. Quick by the standards of those things. Long enough for goodbyes. After she passed, I didn't unravel the way some men do. I organized. I refinanced the house at a lower rate. I simplified accounts. I met quarterly with my accountant, even though there wasn't much left to complicate. Routine is an anchor if you let it be. For 32 years, I ran a regional logistics company. Nothing glamorous. We moved medical supplies across 3 states. If hospitals needed gloves during a snowstorm, my trucks were on the road. I sold the operating side of the business when I turned 68. Daniel thought I should have done it earlier. You don't have to prove anything anymore, he'd said. I wasn't proving anything. I just liked finishing what I started. The sale was clean. I retained a modest holding interest in some underlying assets, warehouse properties mostly, and stepped away from daily management. My income became predictable, comfortable, not extravagant, enough to keep the house, travel twice a year, and contribute to Daniel's daughter's college fund. Daniel works in financial consulting. He's sharp. Always has been. Even as a boy, he negotiated his allowance like it was a merger. We were close in our way. Sunday dinners rotated between my house and his. I fixed things when they broke at his place. A gate hinge, a loose stair rail. He handled my online billing when companies insisted on digital only. A trade of strengths. If there were shifts, they were gradual. He started finishing my sentences, correcting small details in stories I've told the same way for years. Dad, it was 2009, not 2010. You already told me that. Are you sure you deposited that check? Each comment light on its own. Harmless even. Sons grow into men. They take the wheel in conversation sometimes. I didn't resent that. The first time he used the word worried, it almost sounded affectionate. We were in my garage. I was reorganizing a cabinet of old tools. labeling drawers, discarding rusted pieces. "You don't have to keep all this straight anymore," he said. "If something happened to you, I wouldn't even know where to start. That's why it's labeled," I said, holding up the label maker. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just think we should simplify things. Make sure everything's aligned. That was new language. He began asking for copies of statements, offering to streamline, suggesting we consolidate accounts under one dashboard he could monitor just in case. I told him I appreciated it but preferred to manage my own affairs. I've never missed a tax payment, never overdrafted an account. My credit score is higher than his, though I've never said so. Still, I noticed he'd started watching me the way people watch traffic before stepping into it, calculating risk. At dinner one night, I reached for the salt and knocked over my water instead. It happens. His wife stood to grab a towel, but Daniel was already on his feet. "You okay?" he asked quickly. "Yes, you've seemed distracted lately. I was thinking about whether I locked the side gate, you see?" he said gently, turning to his wife as if I weren't fully present. "That's what I mean. I didn't ask what he meant. The truth is, aging plays tricks on your confidence even when your mind is sound. You misplace your glasses and for half a second you wonder if this is how it starts. You forget a name and feel a flicker of heat behind your ribs. Daniel's concern slipped into those small flickers and made them larger than they deserved to be. But here's what I knew then, and know now. I have always kept records, spreadsheets, paper copies, dates, signatures. And 11 days before that meeting in the lawyer's office, I found something in my files that didn't align at all. It wasn't a missing payment. It wasn't a late notice. It was an email Daniel had forwarded to himself from my account, one I had never written. I printed it. Then I checked the metadata, old habits. 32 years in business teaches you where to look. That was the morning I stopped wondering whether I was losing my mind and started wondering why my son needed me to think I was. Daniel chose a Tuesday afternoon to have the conversation. He came alone, which I noticed immediately. Usually, if he was stopping by, his wife came with him, or his daughter was in the back seat finishing homework. That day, he parked at the curb, walked up the front path, and stood on my porch with both hands in his coat pockets. He looked like a man arriving to deliver bad news. I opened the door before he knocked. "Come in," I said. He smiled. "You always know when I'm here." I heard the car. "Right." He stepped inside and looked around the foyer. Not at the photographs, not at the umbrella stand or the old brass clock my wife had bought in Vermont. His eyes went toward the hallway where I kept the file cabinet. It was a quick glance. Quick glances are still choices. "I made coffee," I said. "Sure." We sat in the kitchen. Daniel took the chair across from me and left his coat on. That told me he didn't intend to stay long or didn't want to feel settled. I poured his coffee black. He used to take 2 sugars. He'd stopped doing that years ago, after reading something about inflammation. I remembered because he'd lectured me about it for a week. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "How have you been feeling?" "Well, sleeping. Usually, eating properly. I had oatmeal this morning. That's not what I mean." I know. He rested his hands on the table. His wedding ring caught the light from the window. "I've been thinking about you," he said. "That can be dangerous." He smiled, but only briefly. "I'm serious, Dad." "So am I," he took a breath. "You've had a few moments lately." "Which moments?" "That's not the point. It usually helps to know what we're discussing." His jaw tightened, then relaxed. Daniel had learned early that irritation made him look less reasonable. He was good at correcting his expression before anyone else noticed it. "You forgot the appointment with your cardiologist." "No, I didn't. You missed the appointment." "It was rescheduled." "By whom?" "By the cardiologist's office. They called me the day before." He leaned back. "You see how this becomes difficult?" "I see that we remember it differently. Dad, he said my name the way a teacher says a student's name after the 3rd warning." I looked toward the coffee pot. "You're welcome to check the call log." "I'm not here to argue about an appointment." "Then what are you here for?" He looked down at the table as if gathering the courage to say something painful. "I'm worried you're starting to have trouble managing things." "Which things?" "Finances, bills, insurance, your accounts." I pay all of those, most of the time. I waited. He reached into his coat and removed a thin folder. He placed it beside his coffee but didn't open it. I found a payment from your investment account that didn't make sense, he said. What payment? A transfer. To whom? It was reversed. That doesn't answer the question, he exhaled through his nose. It went to an old vendor account from the company. Which company? Whitaker Medical Logistics. That account was closed in 2018. Exactly, I studied him. How did you see the transfer? He paused just long enough to make the answer meaningful. You sent me access. No, I didn't. Dad, you gave me the login information last year. I gave you access to the household utility account. Not my investments. Maybe you forgot. There it was. Not an accusation. Possibility. A small polished stone placed on the table between us. I took the folder and opened it. Inside were printed statements from 3 of my accounts, each with certain lines highlighted in yellow. The transfer he mentioned was there. $3,800 to a dormant vendor profile. Reversed 2 days later. I had not initiated it. Where did you get these? I asked. You forwarded them. I did not. Maybe you don't remember. I looked at the pages again. The statements were real. The highlighted lines were real. But the email attached to them, the one supposedly sent from me, contained a phrase I would never use. Please handle this matter at your earliest convenience. Daniel knew I disliked that phrase. During my working years, I used to tell employees that at your earliest convenience meant nothing unless a date followed it. I folded the email in half. I'll contact the bank. That's exactly what I'm saying. You shouldn't have to manage all this alone. I'm not alone. I have an accountant. Your accountant is 81. 76. That's not better. I let that pass. Daniel opened the folder again and removed a single-page checklist. At the top, in blue letters, it said, Family Financial Safety Plan. The language was gentle. That was what made it effective. Emergency access, bill, oversight, medical communication, temporary decision support. Nothing said control. Nothing said incapacity. It was all support, safety, and preparation. Who made this? I asked. I did. Why? Because something could happen. Something could happen to anyone. You know what I mean. I know what you're asking. He looked at me directly. I'm asking you to let me help. You already help. Not enough. That isn't your decision. His eyes hardened for half a second. Then he lowered his voice. What if you fall? What if you're hospitalized? What if someone takes advantage of you? Then I'll have the appropriate documents prepared. You don't. I do. Do you have a power of attorney? Yes. Who is named? I am. That's not how it works. It's a durable power of attorney for financial matters. I signed it years ago. And who's your agent? Your mother. The answer landed quietly. Daniel looked away first. My wife had been named as my primary agent with a professional fiduciary as successor. Daniel knew that. He'd been present when we signed the documents, though he'd been 29, and more interested in whether the restaurant afterward served steak. She's gone, he said. I'm aware. Then the document may not be valid anymore. The successor provision is valid. Who is it? A fiduciary service in Hartford. He frowned. You don't even know the person. I know the firm. That's the point of using a firm. Dad, this is what I'm talking about. You're making things complicated when they don't need to be. No, I said. I'm keeping them separate. He pushed the checklist toward me. Just review it. I have reviewed it. You looked at it for 10 seconds. I understood it in 5. He sat back. And for the first time that afternoon, his concern slipped. Beneath it was impatience, not anger. Something colder. You're making me feel like I'm trying to take something from you. I'm not responsible for how an accurate observation makes you feel. His face changed. It was a small thing, a tightening around the mouth. Paused before he answered. Maybe you should talk to someone, he said. An attorney? A doctor. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. Daniel stood and buttoned his coat. I'm going to arrange an appointment with Mr. Reese, he said. He handles family planning. We can get your documents updated. Nothing dramatic. I didn't agree to that. You don't have to agree to a conversation. That depends on whose conversation it is. He walked toward the door, then stopped. I love you, Dad. I know, I'm trying to protect you. I know, he turned. Do you? I looked at him for a long moment. I'm still deciding. He left without saying goodbye. That evening, I called the bank and confirmed that the transfer had been initiated through a device registered to an unfamiliar location. I called my accountant, who told me he had never received the statements Daniel claimed I'd sent then. I opened the email again. The message had been sent from my account at 2:14 in the morning. I was asleep at 2:14, but the most important detail wasn't the time. It was the forwarding address, hidden in the message history, an address that belonged to Daniel. The next morning, he sent me the lawyer's appointment. He wrote that it would be a simple precaution. I replied with one word, fine. What I didn't tell him was that before I accepted the appointment, I had already scheduled one of my own, not with a family lawyer, with someone who knew exactly how my mind worked and who had no reason to protect my son's version of it. Daniel set the meeting for Thursday at 10 a.m. He sent me a calendar invite like I was one of his clients to state planning review. Whitaker family. There was a document attached called Power of Attorney Update. I printed it instead of reading it on the screen. Paper makes things clearer. Full name was already typed in. My address, my date of birth. Under primary agent, it said, Daniel Whitaker. Then I noticed something important. The document said the power would begin immediately, not if I became sick. Not if a doctor said I was unable to decide immediately. That wasn't preparation, that was transfer. Didn't call him about it. I didn't argue. There is value in letting someone think they are ahead. The morning of the meeting, Daniel picked me up. You ready? He asked. I've been ready for a long time, I said. The lawyer's office was quiet and modern. Glass walls, soft chairs, too clean. The lawyer, Mr. Reese, shook Daniel's hand. First, good to see you again, he said. Again, then he turned to Mr. Whitaker, nice to finally meet you. Sat at a round table. Reese opened a folder. Your son mentioned. You wanted to update your documents, he said. I wasn't aware I did. I replied calmly. Daniel leaned forward. Dad, we talked about this. We talked, I said. I didn't agree. Reese kept his voice gentle. This is just to make sure everything runs smoothly if something happens. What kind of something? I asked. Well, health issues, confusion, financial mistakes. I looked at Daniel. What mistakes? I asked. The late-night transfer, he said. The forwarded statements. I did not send those. You don't remember, he replied softly. There it was again. Not an accusation, a suggestion. Reese added, sometimes families notice small changes before the person does. Small changes. Interesting phrase. I folded my hands on the table. Did you write that I have cognitive decline? I asked Reese directly. He hesitated. Your son expressed concerns, he said carefully. Concerns are not diagnoses, I replied. Daniel sighed loudly. This is exactly what I meant. The defensiveness. I am not defensive, I said. I am precise. The room went quiet. Reese cleared his throat. Would you be open to a medical evaluation? Just to reassure everyone. Daniel relaxed in his chair. That's all I'm asking, he said quickly. I nodded slowly. I have no problem with that. Daniel smiled for the first time that morning. But I will choose the doctor, I added. His smile faded. And until that evaluation is complete, I continued, I won't sign anything. Reese nodded. That's reasonable. Daniel forced a small laugh. Of course. That's fine. But as we stood to leave, I saw it in his face. Not concern, not relief, urgency. In the hallway, he stepped aside and pulled out his phone. Who are you calling? He asked. Just moving something around, he said. That afternoon, I received a voicemail by mistake. His voice. He's pushing back, he said to someone. If we're going to do this, we need to move faster. The message ended. 3 minutes later, he called again. Pocket dial, he said. I understand, I replied. And I did. It was time for me to move faster, too. 3 days after the meeting with Reese, Daniel invited me to dinner. Just family. he said. No heavy conversations. His tone was light, almost apologetic. As if the tension in the lawyer's office had been an unfortunate misunderstanding, we could smooth over with roast chicken and polite laughter. I agreed. When you're 74, you learn that refusing invitations only accelerates narratives you didn't author. Their house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, lined with identical maples, ornamental, not the sturdy kind my wife planted. The lawn was trimmed tightly. The porch light flicked on as I pulled into the driveway. Daniel opened the door before I knocked. "Hey," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You made good time. I left early." "That's good," he said, and I couldn't tell whether he meant for traffic or for something else. His wife, Caroline, greeted me with a careful smile. She has always been kind to me, though in recent months her kindness had taken on the quality of supervision. Dinner was pleasant enough. My granddaughter talked about her science project. Caroline refilled my water before it was empty. Daniel asked about my garden. No one mentioned lawyers or evaluations, but there is a difference between silence and peace. After dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom upstairs. Halfway down the hallway, I realized I'd left my reading glasses on the dining table. I turned back. That's when I heard Daniel's voice, lower than before. "Not meant for me," he agreed to the evaluation, he was saying. A pause. "No, not yet. He wants to pick the doctor." Another pause, Caroline's voice this time faint. "What if he passes?" "He won't," Daniel said. "You've seen him." "I've seen him forget things. That's not the same as capacity." A chair scraped against hardwood. "We just need documentation," Daniel continued. "Once the POA is active, we can restructure the holdings. The warehouse properties are sitting there. It doesn't make sense to wait." My hand rested against the hallway wall. Caroline spoke again, quieter. "It's still his. For now." The words were not cruel. They were practical. For now. I stepped fully into the dining room before they noticed me. Daniel straightened immediately. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I was looking for my glasses." "They're right here," Caroline said quickly, picking them up and handing them to me with both hands, as if passing something fragile. "Thank you." No one mentioned what I'd heard. I returned to the table and sat down. Daniel resumed his seat across from me. His expression was composed, but there was a brightness in his eyes, the kind that appears when a man believes he is close to solving a problem. My granddaughter bounded back into the room, asking if I would still take her fishing next weekend. "Of course," I said. Daniel hesitated. "Dad, maybe we should see how you're feeling." "I feel capable of holding a fishing rod. It's not about that." "It rarely is," I said. The room cooled by a degree. Caroline stood. "Coffee?" "Yes," I said. "Black." She disappeared into the kitchen. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You know this isn't about taking anything from you." I heard enough to understand what it's about. His jaw tightened. "You were listening. I was walking down the hallway in your house." He exhaled slowly. "Then you know I'm trying to protect the assets. From whom?" "From mismanagement." "You mean mine." "I mean potential mismanagement." "I built those assets," I said quietly. "Through recessions. Through fuel shortages. Through a year when 3 of my drivers quit in the same week. They are not sitting there by accident. I'm not denying that. You're anticipating my incompetence. I'm preparing for reality." "And what reality is that?" "That you're 74. There it was, not shouted. Not cruel, just stated. I looked at him for a long moment. "Do you believe I don't understand my own accounts?" "I think you're slipping." "Based on what?" "Patterns. Created by whom?" His silence answered more than his words could have. Caroline returned with coffee and set it down between us like a peace offering. Daniel softened his tone. "Dad, even if you pass the evaluation, it doesn't change the bigger picture. Estate planning is responsible. Transitioning control early avoids chaos later." "Transitioning to whom?" "To me, eventually." "Eventually is not now," he rubbed his forehead. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "You're making it faster than it should be." The conversation stalled there. When I stood to leave, my granddaughter hugged me tightly around the waist. "Don't forget next weekend," she said. "I won't." Daniel walked me to the door. I don't want us fighting, he said. Then don't fight me. I'm not your enemy. I haven't decided that. He flinched. Just slightly. On the drive home, the streetlights blurred across my windshield. Not from tears. From thought for now. He had said it so easily, as though ownership were a season that simply rotated on schedule. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat in the car with the engine off and listened to the ticking of cooling metal. This was the low point, though I didn't name it that at the time. Not because I feared losing money, because I understood something. Colder, my son did not need me to be incapable. He only needed documentation that suggested I might become so, and documentation, unlike truth, can be arranged. I went inside and locked the door. Then I opened my desk drawer and took out a folder Daniel had never seen. Inside were original incorporation papers from 1989 amendments from 2003, and a clause most people overlooked because it sat on page 14, under a heading labeled Contingent Voting Authority. Ran my fingers across the signature at the bottom. Mine there. Are advantages to drafting your own structures when you are still very much in your right mind. The next morning, I made 2 appointments, one with a neurologist Daniel would never have chosen, and one with a man who still remembered exactly how I built my company and how control actually worked. The neurologist's office was on the 3rd floor of a medical building that hadn't been renovated since 1995. Beige walls, framed watercolor prints of sailboats. A receptionist who looked at me, not past me. Her name was Linda. She handed me a clipboard. Dr. Patel will be with you shortly, Mr. Whitaker. Not Daniel, not my son. Me, I chose Dr. Arun Patel because he had no connection to my family, no referral from Reese, and no incentive to produce anything other than accuracy. He specialized in cognitive aging and had testified in capacity hearings before. I verified that myself. The evaluation lasted nearly 3 hours. Memory recall, pattern recognition, executive function exercises, delayed word retrieval, financial scenario simulations. At one point, Dr. Patel slid a sheet of paper toward me, filled with numbers, and said, "Imagine you're reviewing this for inconsistencies." I smiled faintly. That's not imagination. When we finished, he closed the file and regarded me carefully. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "why are you here?" "Because someone suggested I might be declining. And what do you think?" "I think clarity benefits everyone," he nodded. "You show no clinical signs of dementia," he said plainly. "Your executive functioning is well above average for your age. Frankly, it's above average for most ages." "Document that," I said. "I will. I'd also like the raw scores included. Not just the summary." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Of course." When I left with the sealed evaluation packet 2 days later, I didn't open it in the parking lot. I already knew what it said. Instead, I drove across town to a brick office building with a modest brass plaque. Harlan and Myers Commercial Advisory. Thomas Myers opened the door himself. He is 79 now. Thinner than he once was, but still upright. He'd been my CFO for 21 years before retiring. He knew every contract, every leverage point, every clause I insisted on keeping when buyers suggested simplifying. "Samuel," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You look the same. I've had practice." We sat in his office, sunlight cutting across shelves of binders labeled by decade. "I'll be direct," he said. "Daniel called me last month. I assumed he might. He asked about the warehouse properties, specifically, whether the holding company could be dissolved without triggering minority consent provisions. I let the silence stretch. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "That it depends who holds the majority voting shares." "And who does?" Thomas studied me for a moment. Then he smiled, slowly. "You do." The holding structure had been my attorney's idea in 2003 during an expansion. We separated operational control from asset ownership. When I sold the operating company, the real estate remained under Whitaker Holdings. LLC 91% voting control remained with me. 9% was distributed across early partners and, later, partially assigned to a trust for Daniel's benefit, non-voting. Daniel knew he would inherit. He did not know he had no present authority. He seemed to believe, Thomas continued carefully, that you were transitioning control. He believes many things. He asked whether cognitive decline would impact enforceability. There it was again, not cruelty strategy. And what did you tell him? I asked. That enforceability depends on documented incapacity or voluntary transfer. Good. Thomas leaned forward. Are you declining, Samuel? No. Then what is this? My son is impatient. Thomas nodded slowly. Impatience is expensive. I handed him a copy of the neurologist's sealed evaluation. I'll be providing this to our family attorney, I said. Not Reese. Good. I'd also like to amend the operating agreement. In what way? Add a conditional trust structure. Voting control remains with me unless two independent physicians certify incapacity. Any attempted transfer absent that certification triggers automatic suspension of beneficiary distributions. Thomas's eyes sharpened. That's specific. I've always preferred clarity. He sat back, considering. You understand what that signals? Yes, that you don't trust your son. It signals that governance requires standards. He held my gaze. Then he nodded once. I'll draft it. Before I left, he added one more detail. There's something else, he said. Daniel inquired about leveraging the warehouse properties as collateral. For what purpose? He didn't specify. But he asked about liquidity timelines, liquidity for now. Thank you, I said. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in weeks. Not anger, not vindication, certainty. When I walked into my house, I placed Dr. Patel's evaluation on my desk beside the amended holding. Documents Thomas had emailed for preliminary. Review 2 sealed envelopes. 2. Forms of proof. 1 medical, 1 structural. Daniel. Believed this was about whether I could remember appointments. It was never about that. It was about whether I still understood leverage. The following morning, Reese's office called to follow up on the unsigned power of attorney. I told the receptionist I would be requesting another meeting. All parties present, I said. She hesitated. Including Daniel? Especially Daniel. When I hung up, I looked around my kitchen, at the maple tree through the window, at the brass clock in the hallway. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. There is a difference. And in 3 days, sitting in that same lawyer's office where my son had described me as confused, I intended to demonstrate it. Rescheduled the meeting for Monday at 9 a.m. All parties, I had said. When I arrived, Daniel was already there. He stood when I entered the conference room, offering a restrained smile. Not warm, not hostile, controlled. Morning, Dad. Daniel. Reese gestured for us to sit. There was water on the table this time. 3 glasses, evenly spaced. A yellow legal pad rested near Reese's elbow. Already dated. I understand you've completed an evaluation, Reese began. I have, I said, placing a sealed envelope on the table but keeping my hand on it. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That was fast. Efficiency is a habit. Reese folded his hands. Before we proceed, I want to clarify the purpose of today's meeting. We're here to ensure your wishes are properly documented and that any concerns are addressed. Good, I said. Clarity is useful, Daniel exhaled, as if bracing himself for unnecessary resistance. Reese turned to him. Daniel, perhaps you can summarize your concerns again for the record. For the record. Daniel nodded. His tone shifted into something professional. Over the past several months, he began, I've observed lapses in judgment and memory. A misdirected financial transfer? Missed appointments. Repetition in conversation. My concern is that without proactive planning, Dad could be vulnerable to exploitation or mismanagement. His phrasing was careful, polished. Reese scribbled a few words. And your proposed solution? Reese asked. A durable power of attorney granting me authority to act immediately, so there's no disruption if something happens. Immediately. Reese looked at me. Mr. Whitaker? Slid the envelope across the table. This is an independent neurological evaluation conducted by Dr. Arun Patel, I said. Board certified. No prior relationship with my family. The full cognitive battery is included, along with raw scores. Reese opened it carefully. His eyes moved left to right across the first page, then the second, Daniel's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Reese cleared his throat. It states here, he said slowly, that you demonstrate no evidence of cognitive impairment. Executive functioning described as exceptionally preserved. Yes, I said. Daniel shifted. One evaluation doesn't mean. It also recommends no restrictions on financial autonomy. Reese continued, still reading. In fact, it notes advanced competency in complex financial reasoning. The room went very quiet. Daniel looked at me. Not angry, assessing. Well, he said lightly, that's good news. It is, I agreed. Reese set the evaluation down. Given this documentation, I see no basis to suggest incapacity. I never said incapacity, Daniel replied quickly. I said precaution. Precaution is appropriate, I said, which is why I've taken additional steps. I reached into my briefcase and removed a second folder, thicker, tabbed. Reese accepted it. These are amended operating documents for Whitaker Holdings, LLC, I said. Effective as of last Friday. Daniel's head turned sharply. What amendments? He asked. Reese scanned the cover page. His eyebrows lifted. It appears, he said slowly, that you've added a conditional control clause. Correct. Daniel leaned forward. Dad, what is that? It clarifies governance, I said calmly. Reese continued reading aloud. Voting authority shall remain exclusively with the managing member, unless two independent licensed physicians certify cognitive incapacity. Any attempt to induce transfer absent such certification shall result in automatic suspension of beneficiary distributions pending review. Daniel's color shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Induce transfer, he repeated. Yes. You think I'm inducing something? I think documentation matters. His composure thinned. This is extreme. No, I said evenly. This is specific. Reese looked between us. Mr. Whitaker, this clause would effectively prevent any change in control without medical confirmation. That is the intent. Daniel's voice sharpened. You didn't tell me you were changing the holding structure. You didn't tell me you contacted Thomas about dissolving it. Silence. Reese's pen stopped moving. Daniel recovered quickly. I was exploring options. Liquidity options? I asked. His jaw tightened. That's private. So are my accounts. The air in the room felt heavier now. Reese leaned back slightly. Daniel, did you inquire about restructuring the warehouses? Daniel hesitated. A mistake. I asked general questions, he said. About leveraging them as collateral? I asked. His eyes flicked to mine. Just for a second. Reese closed the folder carefully. I need to be clear, he said, voice measured. Based on this evaluation and these documents, there is no legal justification to activate or even draft an immediate durable power of attorney predicated on cognitive concern. Daniel looked at him sharply. We weren't activating anything. You drafted it as immediately effective, I said. Reese did not contradict me. Daniel stood abruptly and walked a few steps toward the window. Then back again, contained but no longer fully composed. This is ridiculous, he said. I'm trying to protect the family. From me? I asked. From chaos. There is no chaos. There will be. On what timetable? I asked quietly. Yours? He stopped pacing. For a moment I saw something unguarded in his expression. Not greed, fear. You're 74, he said again, softer now. Things change fast at that age. Yes, I said. They do. Reese folded his hands. Perhaps, he suggested cautiously, we shift the conversation. Instead of immediate authority, we could discuss a springing power of attorney, activated only upon certified incapacity. I looked at Daniel. He didn't answer. That would be reasonable, I said. With two independent physicians, not one, Reese nodded. That aligns with the amendment to your holding company. Daniel remained standing. And until such certification exists, I continued, all financial authority remains with me, exclusively. Daniel's face had gone pale now. Not dramatically, but enough to betray the realization settling in. He had anticipated resistance. He had not anticipated structure. He slowly returned to his chair. So that's it? He asked. You don't trust me. I met his eyes. This isn't about trust, I said. It's about timing. Reese looked down at his legal pad. Then back up. Given the documentation provided, he said carefully, I recommend we withdraw the current draft and, if desired, prepare a contingent instrument reflecting these conditions. Daniel said nothing. I gathered my evaluation and left copies for Reese. As I stood, Daniel spoke, quieter than before. You really think I was trying to take something from you? I paused. I think, I said, you were trying to move something forward before it was time. He held my gaze, and for the first time since this began, he didn't argue. We did not speak in the elevator. Daniel stood beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the descending floor numbers as if they required supervision. When the doors opened to the lobby, he stepped out first. I followed at my own pace. Outside, the morning air was clear. Traffic moved steadily along the avenue. Ordinary sounds, ordinary rhythm. Struck me how little the world notices when a family recalibrates its center of gravity. Daniel stopped near the curb. So what happens now? He asked. Now, I said, we proceed responsibly. That's what I've been trying to do. No, I replied calmly. You've been trying to accelerate. He didn't deny it this time. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said. I know. I was trying to avoid a crisis. There isn't one. There will be. Eventually, I agreed. But not today. He looked at me then. Not as an obstacle, not as a problem to manage. Just as his father. What if something happens suddenly? He asked. A stroke. An accident. We'd be scrambling. We won't, I said. The documents will reflect that. That afternoon, I met again with Thomas and our long-standing family attorney, Margaret Ellis, who had drafted my original estate plan 20 years ago. She is deliberate, unsentimental, and immune to family theatrics. We finalized 3 things. First, a springing durable power of attorney, activated only upon written certification of incapacity by 2 independent physicians with no financial relationship to any beneficiary. Second, the formal adoption of the amended Whitaker Holdings Governance Clause, locking voting control to medical certification standards already defined. Third, the creation of a structured, irrevocable trust for Daniel and his daughter, funded modestly now, with substantial assets transferring only upon my death or verified incapacity. The trust included provisions I insisted on. Personally, quarterly financial literacy meetings with an independent advisor. Restrictions on leveraging real estate assets without unanimous trustee consent. And one clause, Margaret. Read twice before looking up at me. Are you certain about this? She asked. Yes, the clause required that any trustee or beneficiary who attempted to secure control through misrepresentation of medical condition would trigger a 5-year suspension of discretionary distributions. Not permanent. Disinheritance suspension. Consequence, not exile. When Daniel came to review the finalized documents 2 days later, he was quieter. Margaret walked him through each provision without emphasis, without accusation. Just language. He read the suspension clause slowly. You think I'd misrepresent you? He asked. I think clarity prevents temptation, I said. He sat back in the chair. You've locked everything down. I've stabilized it. He exhaled through his nose. Not angry, just recalculating. And I'm still trustee? He asked. Yes, co-trustee with Margaret's firm. So you do trust me. I trust structure, I said. Structure protects relationships. That seemed to land somewhere deeper than argument. He flipped through the pages again. You could have cut me out. I didn't want to. Why not? Because you're my son. The room was very still. For the first time in weeks, there was no strategy in his face. Only fatigue. I thought you were slipping, he said quietly. I know. And I panicked. I know. He closed the folder. I shouldn't have logged into your account, he said. It was not loud, not dramatic. Just factual. No, I agreed. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd explain once everything was secure. That's often how overreach begins. He nodded once. I'm sorry. I studied him for a long moment. Apologies at his age are expensive. They cost pride. I accept that, I said. Margaret cleared her throat gently. Then we have alignment. Daniel gave a faint, almost rueful smile. Alignment, he repeated. When we stood to leave, he didn't rush ahead. He held the door for me, not performatively, naturally. Authority had not shifted. It had been clarified. And strangely, once clarified, the urgency drained out of the room. That evening, Daniel called. "No agenda," he said. "Just checking in." "I'm here," I replied. We spoke about ordinary things. His daughter's upcoming fishing trip. A new client. The weather turning warmer. He did not mention control, neither did I, because control, once quietly re-established, no longer needed defending. It has been 11 months since the meeting in Reese's office. The maple tree in my backyard is fuller now. Summer settled in, then began its slow retreat. Seasons continue whether families are stable or not. There is comfort in that. Daniel and I still have Sunday dinners. They are different, not tense, not fragile, just more honest. For a while after the documents were finalized, he overcorrected. He deferred to me excessively, asked permission for opinions he once delivered freely. It was as if he believed respect required distance. It doesn't. Respect requires recognition. One evening in early autumn, he arrived alone again. No folder this time, no printed statements. We sat on the back patio watching the light fade through the leaves. "I've been thinking about that voicemail," he said. "The one you didn't mean to leave?" "Yes," I waited. "I listened to it again," he continued. I sounded like I was negotiating a merger. "You were," I said mildly. He gave a faint smile. "That's what scared me." "What did?" "That I stopped seeing you as my father and started seeing you as a timing variable." I appreciated the precision of that phrase. Timing variables can be manipulated. I said, "Exactly." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When Mom was sick," he said, "everything deteriorated fast. 1 month she was fine. The next month we were signing forms in hospital corridors. I think I convinced myself I was preventing that from happening again. Your mother's illness was not caused by paperwork, I know, but the feeling of helplessness was." He nodded. "I hated that feeling. So you tried to outrun Drise. There was no defensiveness in him now, just recognition." I looked at the maple tree. "Do you know why I kept majority control when I sold the company?" I asked. "I assumed you didn't trust the buyers." "I didn't, but that wasn't the main reason." "Then what was?" "Because control isn't about ego. It's about responsibility. If something failed, I wanted it to fail under my watch. Not because I handed it to someone eager, but unready." He absorbed that quietly. "I thought I was ready," he said. "You are ready to manage assets," I replied. "You are not ready to manage me." He laughed softly. "Fair." We sat in silence for a moment. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About your mind?" "Yes." "And about the speed?" "Yes." He nodded, accepting the simplicity of that. "But you were right about one thing," I added. He looked up. "We do need structure." He seemed surprised. "I don't plan to live forever," I continued. "When the time comes, and it will, the transition should be seamless, not rushed, not improvised." "I don't want it rushed," he said. I know, that was the difference now. I believed him. The trust has begun its quarterly meetings. Daniel attends them without resistance. Margaret's firm asks questions he doesn't always enjoy, and he answers them anyway. Governance has replaced assumption. As for the neurologist's evaluation, I keep a copy in my desk drawer. Not because I expect to need it again, but because it reminds me of something important. Clarity is a discipline. Aging does not require surrender. There is a quiet pressure placed on men my age, subtle, persistent, a suggestion that competence naturally fades into irrelevance, that authority should be stepped down not because it has failed, but because it has existed long enough. Sometimes that pressure comes from strangers. Sometimes it comes from your own children. The mistake would be to meet that pressure with outrage. Outrage confirms instability. Restraint reveals strength. Did not win anything in that lawyer's office. I did not defeat my son. I did something far less dramatic and far more necessary. I insisted on evidence, and in doing so, I preserved more than voting shares or warehouse properties. I preserved authorship of my finances, of my mind, of my own timing. Last weekend, I took my granddaughter fishing. She stood at the edge of the lake holding the rod with both hands, concentrating as if the water were negotiating back. Be patient, I told her. How long? She asked. As long as it takes, she frowned. That's not a real answer. It is, I said. It's just not fast. When she finally felt the line pull and reeled in a modest shining perch, she looked up at me with astonishment. I did it, she said. Yes, I replied. You did. Daniel watched from a few yards away. He didn't offer advice, he didn't step in, he just observed. Later, as we packed up the tackle box, he met my eyes across the dock. No urgency, no calculation, just understanding. There will come a day when two physicians sign a document and say, I am no longer capable of managing what I built. If that day arrives, the structure is ready. Until then, I remain what I have always been. Not confused, not declining, simply deliberate, and deliberation. I've learned is not something you surrender because someone else grows impatient.